Carisha stood at the highest point of her dark throne room, looking out over the planet below. The surface of the world was bathed in a constant, eerie twilight, where the sun never truly rose, and shadows stretched like endless fingers. This was the heart of her empire, the world where she ruled with an iron fist. The Zorkari Empire, named after the ancient beings who had first conquered the stars, was vast, spanning hundreds of worlds, each one bending to her will. Carisha was the Empress of Shadows, the harbinger of night. Her name was whispered in fear across the galaxy. When she spoke, planets trembled. When she ordered an attack, fleets of warships fell silent before her. Her powers were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. She controlled the shadows themselves, bending them to her will, using them to choke the life out of her enemies, or to hide her own movements like a ghost in the night. No one could escape her grasp. Her empire was built on fear. Fear of her power. Fear of her wrath. And yet, Carisha had never known anything else. Since the day she had taken the throne, her heart had been cold and unyielding. There was no room for mercy in her rule. Her people feared her, and that was exactly how she wanted it. Fear made her strong. Fear kept others from challenging her. Fear was the reason she had never been betrayed, never been hurt by anyone close to her. But even the strongest of rulers need to face the unknown. And in the darkest corners of the galaxy, there were whispers of something new, something strange, something Carisha could not control. It began with a message. A small, unmarked ship arrived at the heart of her empire, and on board was a human diplomat. Earth was a small, distant world, far from the power centers of the galaxy. Humans were seen as weak, insignificant compared to the mighty races Carisha had crushed. She had wiped out entire species, so why would she care about a lone human, especially one from such a primitive world? Her generals laughed when the message arrived. A simple, almost childish letter, demanding that Carisha meet with this human. The message was signed with a single name, Ethan. Carisha's eyes narrowed. She had heard of humans before, but never thought they would be foolish enough to challenge her directly. She was curious, yes, but also irritated. How dare this insignificant species think they could approach her? She gave the order for the human to be brought before her. When Ethan entered her throne room, he appeared unimpressed by the vast hall filled with dark stone and glowing crimson lights. His clothes were simple, unlike the elaborate uniforms of her generals. He was nothing special to look at, just a man, standing alone before the most powerful being in the galaxy. His face was calm, his eyes clear, and his posture was steady. He didn't flinch when he saw the throne, nor when he laid eyes on the woman who had destroyed entire civilizations. Carisha studied him for a moment. The human didn't seem scared. That, in itself, intrigued her. "You must be Ethan," Carisha said in her cold, commanding voice. "What is it that brings you to my domain, human? You know who I am, don't you?" Ethan looked directly into her eyes, his expression unchanged. "Yes, I know who you are, Empress Carisha. I know your power, your reputation. I also know that you rule through fear." Carisha narrowed her eyes. She was used to seeing fear in the eyes of those who faced her, yet Ethan seemed calm. Too calm. "And what of it?" she asked, her voice a low growl. "What are you going to do about it?" Ethan took a step forward, still unafraid. "I'm here because I think you're missing something important, something you've never had." Carisha raised an eyebrow, her curiosity piqued. "And what would that be, human?" A smile flickered on Ethan's face, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Laughter. You've never laughed, have you?" For the first time, Carisha felt a strange sensation, something she couldn't quite place. "Laughter," she repeated, her voice colder now, as if the word itself disgusted her. "I do not have time for such trivial things." Ethan didn't flinch. "That's what I'm here to teach you. How to laugh. How to find joy, even in the darkest of times." Carisha stared at him, unblinking. Her empire had been built on strength and fear, and yet this human was standing before her, suggesting something as foolish as laughter could be of any use. Her soldiers had been trained to obey her every command, her fleets to fight without hesitation, and her enemies to bow before her power. But laughter, it seemed weak, ridiculous. Still, there was something about Ethan's calm confidence that made her pause. Maybe, just maybe, she would let him explain further. But she was not about to let some insignificant human change the course of her empire. Not yet, anyway. "You think you can teach me something that will make me weaker?" she asked, her tone sharp. Ethan didn't back down. "No, I think you've been so focused on fear that you've forgotten what it means to be truly powerful. Laughter is strength, Carisha. It's something you've never allowed yourself to feel. But if you let me teach you, you might just discover a side of yourself that's far stronger than anything fear could ever give you." For a moment, Carisha was silent. The room was still. The weight of his words hung in the air. And though she did not show it, something inside her shifted. Could laughter really be the key to something greater? She had always prided herself on her strength, her power, but maybe, just maybe, there was something more. Carisha sat on her dark throne, staring at Ethan, the human who had dared to enter her world. His calm demeanor irritated her, yet she couldn't deny the curiosity his words had sparked. She had conquered so many worlds, crushed countless enemies, and commanded armies with ease, but laughter, it seemed so trivial. Yet, for some reason, she couldn't push him away just yet. Her generals and advisors stood in the shadows, watching the exchange, their faces filled with confusion and suspicion. They couldn't understand why Carisha hadn't killed Ethan on the spot, but Carisha was not like them. She wasn't ruled by fear or uncertainty. She was the harbinger of night, a being who controlled shadows and held the fate of entire worlds in her hands. And yet, this human spoke as though he understood something about life that she didn't. "You really believe you can teach me how to laugh?" Carisha's voice was cold, her words deliberate. "I spent years building an empire through power. Through fear. What can laughter do for me?" Ethan remained calm, unfazed by her harsh tone. "Laughter isn't about weakness, Empress. It's about strength. It's about finding joy even in the darkest moments. It's about connection." He paused, as though carefully choosing his next words. "You've conquered so much, but what have you gained from it? Fear. Control? But what happens when all you have is fear?" Carisha's eyes narrowed. She had never been challenged like this. No one spoke to her this way, especially not in her own court. Her empire was vast, stretching across star systems. No one dared to question her authority. But this human, this insignificant creature, spoke as if he knew more about her than she knew about herself. "You talk of joy and connection," Carisha said, her voice dark. "What is there to connect to in a galaxy filled with enemies and betrayal?" Ethan's gaze softened, and for the first time, Carisha saw something in him that didn't seem like mere human weakness. He wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't afraid of anything. "You might be surprised," he said. "Even the most powerful people can feel alone, even if they don't show it. But laughter helps us remember we're not alone. That's why I'm here. I want to show you something you've never allowed yourself to feel." Carisha's mind raced. Was he right? Could laughter really help her connect to others in a way she had never thought possible? She had always been taught that emotions were a weakness, that compassion, joy, and laughter were things that had no place in a ruler's life. They only made you vulnerable. But something about Ethan's words made her wonder if she had been wrong all along. "What do you expect from me?" Carisha asked, her voice tinged with a mix of challenge and curiosity. "Do you expect me to just laugh? To forget everything I built, all the power I've taken, for the sake of some childish notion of happiness?" Ethan smiled, and for the first time, Carisha saw warmth in his eyes, a kindness that contrasted sharply with the coldness of her own heart. "I'm not asking you to forget your power, Empress. I'm asking you to understand it in a different way. Laughter doesn't take away strength. It adds to it." Carisha was silent for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. She had ruled with fear for so long, never questioning the path she had chosen. Her empire, though vast and mighty, was also built on isolation. She had no true friends, no true allies. There were only those who feared her and those who obeyed her. She had never allowed herself to open up to anyone, never allowed herself to show any vulnerability. "Fine," she said finally, her voice hard, but tinged with reluctant curiosity. "You have your chance. Teach me this. Laughter. Show me how it makes me stronger." Ethan nodded. "Thank you, Empress. I promise you won't regret it." Over the next few days, Carisha allowed Ethan to teach her. The lessons were strange. He didn't force her to laugh. Instead, he spoke to her of Earth, of human culture, and how humor was a part of life. He told her stories about how people laughed at mistakes, at misfortunes, and how laughter brought them together. He shared jokes, moments from his own life, and slowly, Carisha found herself listening intently. She didn't laugh. Not yet, but something inside her stirred. She began to see the world in a different way. The rigid structure of her rule, the constant battles, the endless campaigns, they all seemed so distant compared to the idea of laughter. There was something about it that seemed freeing. It wasn't something she had ever allowed herself to experience, but she was beginning to understand why humans valued it so much. One day, Ethan told her a story from his childhood. It was about a time when he had tried to impress his friends by performing a trick, only to fail miserably and trip over his own feet. Instead of feeling embarrassed, Ethan had laughed at himself. His friends had laughed too, not to mock him, but because they shared in the moment. Carisha listened closely, trying to picture it in her mind. A group of people, laughing together, not out of cruelty, but because they found joy in the simple, imperfect moments of life. For the first time, Carisha felt a small shift inside her, a crack in the cold, unfeeling wall she had built around herself. Carisha stood on the balcony of her darkened palace, her eyes scanning the vast expanse of space. The stars were distant, cold points of light, as far and unreachable as the emotion she had spent years locking away. Below her, the city was quiet, its streets shadowed and empty, the silence broken only by the hum of machinery and the distant calls of her soldiers. Her empire was built on fear, and that fear kept everything in place. But Ethan, the human who had dared to walk into her world, was changing things. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he was making her question the very foundation of her rule. She had agreed to his strange request, to learn how to laugh. She didn't fully understand why, but something about his words, his calm confidence, had sparked a flicker of curiosity inside her. It wasn't just the idea of laughter itself that intrigued her. It was the possibility that there might be more to life than power and control. She had built her empire by dominating others, forcing them to bow before her, but Ethan had made her wonder, was there another way to lead? The next day, she called for him. Ethan entered her chamber with the same calm demeanor he always had. He didn't act like a prisoner, even though she had the power to end his life with a single word. He didn't flinch or cower in her presence, and that irritated Carisha. Yet there was also something about his quiet confidence that made her feel uncomfortable. Was he really so sure of himself, or was there something more to his behavior than simple arrogance? "You've agreed to teach me how to laugh," Carisha said, her voice low and steady. "Start then." Ethan didn't hesitate. He nodded, his eyes bright with a mix of determination and warmth. "Okay, Empress, we'll start with the basics." He began by telling her stories, funny, simple tales from his life back on Earth. The first one was about a time when he had tried to cook a meal for his family, but ended up burning everything. "I thought I was a great cook," he said, laughing at the memory. "I followed the recipe step by step, but somehow, everything turned out completely wrong. The kitchen was filled with smoke, and we couldn't even eat the food. But instead of being angry, my family just laughed. They laughed because I had tried, and because it was so ridiculous. At first, Carisha listened with a stoic expression. She couldn't understand why anyone would laugh at something as foolish as failing at cooking. In her world, mistakes were weaknesses, and weakness was something no one could afford. But as Ethan's story went on, something inside her stirred. The way he described the laughter of his family, how they had shared a moment of joy despite the failure, began to shift something within her. Why would they laugh? Carisha asked, her voice laced with confusion. If I had done that, I would have punished myself for failing. Ethan smiled gently. That's the difference, Empress. Laughter helps us see the humor in things that don't go as planned. It helps us realize that it's okay to make mistakes. It's not about weakness. It's about being human. It's about being able to laugh at yourself and not take everything so seriously. Carisha thought about it for a moment. I have never laughed at myself, she admitted. There has never been room for mistakes. If I failed, I would lose everything. I would show weakness, and that is not allowed. Ethan nodded, as though he understood. But you don't have to lose everything just because you make a mistake. Laughter isn't about weakness, Empress. It's about seeing the lighter side of life, even when things don't go the way you expect. For the first time, Carisha felt a flicker of understanding. She wasn't sure what to make of it, but she felt a shift. The idea that laughter could be a source of strength, not weakness, was something she had never considered. Could it be true? Could it be possible that this human knew something she didn't? Ethan continued his lessons over the next few days, telling her more stories and introducing her to the concept of humor. He explained how laughter could connect people, how it could break down walls and bring people together. He spoke of how humans laughed even in times of great sorrow, how humor helped them heal and endure the hardships of life. Carisha found herself intrigued, though she still couldn't bring herself to laugh. It was foreign to her, but Ethan's words were starting to make sense. Perhaps laughter wasn't something to fear after all. Maybe it wasn't a sign of weakness, but a way to find strength in the face of life's challenges. One evening, as they sat in her chamber, Ethan told her another story, this one about his childhood. It was a simple story about a group of children playing a game, and one of them, in his excitement, had tripped and fallen. Instead of feeling embarrassed, the child had laughed, and soon, everyone around him had joined in. It was a small moment, but the way Ethan told it, how the laughter had brought everyone closer, struck Carisha deeply. Do you see? Ethan asked after the story was finished. Laughter is something we share. It's a bond, a way to connect with others. Carisha stared at him, her mind racing. She had always been alone, even among her closest allies. She had never allowed anyone to get too close, fearing that if she did, they would betray her or, worse, use her vulnerability against her. But what if Ethan was right? What if laughter could be the key to something she had never known? You've told me much about your world, human, Carisha said softly. But will laughter truly change anything? Can it really make me stronger? Ethan smiled, his eyes filled with genuine warmth. Yes, Empress. Laughter can make you stronger. It can help you see the world in a new light, one where you don't have to be afraid of mistakes or failures, where you don't have to rule with fear. It can help you lead in a way that no one expects. Carisha's heart tightened at his words. She had ruled with fear for so long, but maybe, just maybe, laughter could offer something more. She didn't know if she was ready to let go of everything she had built, but one thing was clear, something was changing within her. For the first time, she found herself looking at Ethan not just as a prisoner, but as a teacher. And perhaps, just perhaps, he had come into her life to teach her something far more important than laughter itself. Days passed, and with each one, Carisha found herself growing more and more confused. The idea of laughter, of joy, of connecting with others, was becoming harder to ignore. It was a concept so foreign to her, yet something inside her longed to understand it. Ethan had taught her so much already, but she still hadn't taken the final step. She hadn't laughed. Carisha continued to rule her empire with the same cold efficiency, but in the quiet moments when she was alone, She thought about his words. Laughter made people stronger. Laughter helped people bond. And even though she couldn't yet see how it would change her world, she couldn't stop thinking about it. One evening, as the twin moons of her planet hung low in the sky, Carisha sat on her throne, staring into the darkness. The shadows around her seemed to pulse, like they were alive, responding to her every thought. The weight of her empire, the weight of her power, was always present, but tonight it felt different. She felt restless, unsure. The silence of the room was heavy, pressing in on her. She could still hear Ethan's voice in her mind. Laughter helps us see the lighter side of life. It brings us together. But what did that even mean? How could she, a ruler who had built her empire by crushing others, find something as fragile as laughter to be of any use? The more she thought about it, the more uncertain she became. Then, without warning, the doors to her chamber opened, and Ethan walked in. As usual, he was calm, unbothered by the imposing atmosphere of her throne room. He approached her, and for the first time, Carisha noticed how different he seemed. He didn't look like a prisoner or a diplomat. He looked like someone who was actually here to help her. And for some reason, that thought unsettled her. "You're troubled, Empress," Ethan said, his voice soft but perceptive. Carisha looked at him, her face betraying nothing. "I am always troubled, human," she replied, her voice sharp. "There is no peace for someone like me." Ethan smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "I understand that. But you're not alone in this, Carisha. You've always had the power to change, to find something more than fear and control." Carisha stared at him for a long moment, his words hanging in the air. She had always been alone, even surrounded by millions of followers. She had never allowed anyone close, always keeping them at arm's length. But Ethan wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't trying to take anything from her. He was offering something she didn't know she wanted, a way out of the loneliness that had shaped her entire life. "I don't understand," Carisha admitted, her voice softer than she intended. "I don't know how to laugh. I don't know how to let go." Ethan took a step closer, his eyes kind and patient. "You don't have to try to force it, Empress. Laughter isn't something you can control. It's something you experience. It's something that comes when you're ready. And I think you're closer than you realize." For the first time, Carisha felt a strange sense of vulnerability. Ethan wasn't like the others who had bowed to her, who had been afraid of her. He wasn't asking for anything, and yet he was offering her something that she didn't know how to take. She had spent so many years guarding her emotions, building walls around her heart. Could it really be possible to break them down? Before she could answer, Ethan did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a simple sound, not forced or loud, but genuine. A small chuckle, as though he had just remembered something funny. It was the first time Carisha had ever heard him laugh, and for some reason, it caught her off guard. It wasn't a mocking laugh or a nervous one. It was real. It was full of life. And for a brief moment, Carisha found herself watching him, her gaze fixed on his face, waiting for him to explain. But he didn't. He simply looked at her with a smile, as if to say, "This is what it is." It was so simple, yet in that instant, it felt like everything she had ever known was being turned upside down. "Why did you laugh?" she asked, her voice quieter now. Ethan looked at her, his expression soft. "Because sometimes life is funny, Carisha. Sometimes things happen that you don't expect, and instead of fighting it, you can just laugh. It doesn't make the problems go away, but it makes them easier to handle." Carisha looked down at her hands. She had always been in control, always calculated every move, every plan. But what Ethan was saying, it didn't make sense. And yet, somehow, it did. Maybe it was the way he said it. Maybe it was the warmth in his voice. Maybe it was just because, for the first time, someone was trying to help her see the world in a different way. She felt a strange sensation deep inside her, a small crack in the fortress she had built around her emotions. She had never allowed herself to feel anything other than cold calculation and the thrill of power. But now, standing here with Ethan, she felt something shift. Maybe it was time to let go of the past. Still, she was not ready to laugh. Not yet, but she was closer than she had ever been. Ethan's laugh echoed in her mind. It wasn't the laughter of a fool or a coward. It was the laughter of someone who had faced life's challenges and found a way to rise above them. It was the laughter of someone who didn't need to be perfect, who didn't need to control everything. Carisha looked at him again, her expression unreadable. "You think I can laugh, don't you?" Ethan nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know you can. You just need to let go. Laugh when the moment comes, not because you're trying, but because it's real." Carisha's eyes softened, just a little. She wasn't ready yet, but something inside her was beginning to crack. For the first time, she felt a possibility, a spark that could change everything. And maybe, just maybe, that spark would grow into something powerful. Carisha woke to the soft hum of her palace, the familiar sounds of power and control surrounding her. Yet today, there was something different in the air. The darkness that usually clung to her every step felt less oppressive, as though the weight of the galaxy she carried had lightened, even if just a little. Ethan's words, his laugh, were still echoing in her mind, refusing to fade. She had spent her life ruling with fear, keeping her emotions locked away, believing that control was the only way to remain strong. But now she found herself questioning everything. Could laughter truly make her stronger? Could it truly connect her to others in a way she had never known? Carisha walked through the halls of her palace, the silence of her steps almost unnatural. The empire she ruled was vast, yet no one truly knew her. They feared her, obeyed her, but they didn't understand her. Even her generals, her most trusted soldiers, only saw her as a figure of power, a shadow looming over them. No one dared to show her weakness, not even for a moment. She entered the chamber where she usually met with Ethan. He had been teaching her about laughter for weeks now, but she still hadn't fully embraced it. She could see how it affected him, how it made him lighter, more human in a way she didn't quite understand. But her heart was still cold, hardened by years of ruling, by years of never allowing herself to feel anything that could make her vulnerable. "Empress," Ethan greeted her as he entered the room. His tone was always gentle, always kind. He never pushed her, never demanded that she change. Instead, he simply waited, allowing her to move at her own pace. And somehow, that patience had begun to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. "Today, I want to try something different," Carisha said, her voice steady but uncertain. "I want you to show me how to laugh, truly laugh. Not through stories or words, but through something real." Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised. It wasn't often that Carisha showed any vulnerability, let alone asked for help with something as personal as laughter. But there was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. "All right," Ethan said, "but laughter doesn't happen because we force it. It comes when we least expect it, when we allow ourselves to be present, to experience the moment." Carisha didn't respond. Instead, she sat down on a cushion in the center of the room, the same position she had seen Ethan take many times during their lessons. She closed her eyes, letting her mind settle. She wasn't sure what she was supposed to feel, but she knew that for the first time, she was open to the idea of laughter. Ethan sat across from her, his calm presence comforting yet foreign to her. He didn't speak for a long time. He simply waited. It felt strange, being still, allowing the silence to stretch between them. Carisha had spent so long controlling everything around her that sitting in silence, doing nothing, felt like a weakness. But she didn't stand up. She didn't walk away. Instead, she sat, and for the first time, she allowed herself to simply be. Minutes passed, and Carisha's mind began to quiet. She didn't think about the Empire or her soldiers or the endless battles she fought. She didn't think about the dark past that had shaped her or the cold future she was afraid to face. Instead, she focused on the moment, the air that filled her lungs, the way the soft light of the room bathed everything in a warm glow. She began to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. Peace. And then something unexpected happened. A thought, a memory, slipped into her mind. It was a simple one. From a time long ago, when she had been a young ruler, still learning the weight of power. She had tried to make a grand speech to her generals, and in the middle of it, she had tripped over her own words, her voice cracking embarrassingly. Her generals had laughed, not out of mockery, but because it was a moment of shared humanity. The memory was faint, but the feeling it stirred was vivid. For the first time, in a long time, Carisha smiled. The smile was small, barely noticeable, but it was real. It wasn't a calculated gesture or a tool to show power. It was genuine. It was the first time she had allowed herself to feel something without fear of it making her weak. Ethan noticed the change immediately. His eyes lit up, a quiet understanding passing between them. "How does it feel?" he asked softly. Carisha opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "I don't know," she said, her voice unsure. "But I think it feels like freedom." Ethan smiled, a wide, warm smile that reached his eyes. "That's the first step, Empress. You've let go, even if just for a moment. And that moment is enough." Carisha's heart thudded in her chest. It was such a simple thing, a small moment of laughter, a smile shared. But it felt like a crack had appeared in the armor she had worn for so long. A small crack, but one that could grow. "I've spent so much of my life holding on to everything," Carisha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I never knew what I was missing." Ethan looked at her with kindness in his eyes. "You've spent your whole life in control, Carisha, but sometimes letting go is the only way to truly be in control." Carisha sat back, her mind racing. Letting go. It sounded so simple, yet it was so hard. She had built her empire on strength, on control. To let go, to laugh, to feel, those things were foreign to her. But in that small moment, when the smile had crossed her face, something shifted. Maybe laughter was the key to something greater. Maybe it was the key to understanding herself and others in a way she never had before. Maybe, just maybe, it was the key to breaking the cycle of fear and power that had held her captive for so long. "I want to try again," Carisha said, her voice steady now, filled with determination. "I want to understand this. I want to learn how to laugh, truly laugh." Ethan nodded, his smile never fading. "You're already on your way, Empress." And for the first time in her life, Carisha believed him. Carisha stood before her grand mirror, her reflection staring back at her with the same cold eyes she had worn for years. But today, something was different. She wasn't the same woman who had ruled with fear and silence. The smile she had allowed herself to show was still there, faint but present. The small crack in her armor was widening, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if that was a good thing or a dangerous one. Her thoughts drifted back to the moments she had spent with Ethan. His laughter had made her wonder about the things she had never allowed herself to feel. She had spent so much time focused on power, control, and the fear that others had of her. But now she was beginning to question whether all of that was truly strength. Could laughter, something so simple, really make her stronger? Was it possible that her empire could thrive in a way she had never imagined, without the chains of fear? Carisha's mind raced with these thoughts, but she didn't have time to dwell on them. She had a meeting scheduled with her generals. The war was far from over, and the empire still needed her leadership. The weight of her responsibilities bore down on her, but today she felt different. She was nervous, unsure of herself in a way she had never been before. Could she still command the respect of her soldiers if she let go of some of her power? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Ethan entered the room, his usual calm demeanor unchanged. There was a small, knowing smile on his face. He had noticed the change in her, even before she had fully accepted it. "Are you ready, Empress?" he asked, his voice gentle, yet filled with understanding. Carisha nodded slowly. I am. But today is different. I can feel it. Ethan's smile widened. That's good. The first step to change is realizing that you can change. You're starting to understand what laughter can do. It's about more than just finding joy. It's about finding strength in places you never thought to look before. Carisha took a deep breath and turned toward the door. I'm not sure if I'm ready for this, but I'll try. As she walked to the war room, the familiar sight of her generals waiting for her brought a sense of unease. They were all strong, disciplined, and loyal. They had followed her for years, knowing that their success depended on her ability to control every situation. But today, Carisha wasn't sure if she could do that. What if they saw her differently now? What if they no longer respected her if she showed any sign of vulnerability? The room fell silent as she entered. All eyes turned to her, but no one spoke. The tension in the room was thick, as it always was before an important strategy meeting. Carisha stood before them, her hands clasped behind her back. She was ready to address the war plans. But today, something in her wanted to try something different. Her gaze swept across the room, and she realized how much she had distanced herself from these people. They had always seen her as their ruler, not as someone they could connect with. They feared her, yes, but they did not know her. She had never allowed them to. Today, she began, her voice steady, but with an unfamiliar softness. We are going to do things differently. The generals exchanged puzzled glances. Carisha could see their confusion, but she didn't back down. She had made up her mind. This meeting would be a test, not of her strength in battle, but of her ability to lead with something she had never considered: trust. I've been thinking, she continued, about how we have led this empire. We have always relied on fear, on discipline. But perhaps it's time to ask ourselves if that's enough. If we lead with nothing but power, we risk losing the very thing that makes us strong. The room was dead silent now. Carisha could feel the weight of their disbelief, but she pushed forward. Humans, she said, her voice growing stronger. They lead in a different way. I've seen it. They lead with laughter, with connection. It's not about control. It's about trust. And today, I want to see if we can do the same. We will still fight, we will still win, but we will do it together, as a team. For a moment, no one spoke. The generals stood still, unsure of what to say. But then, one by one, they began to nod, albeit hesitantly. They didn't fully understand her words, but they knew one thing. Carisha had always been right. She had never been wrong in her leadership before. If she believed this was the way forward, then perhaps it was. The silence broke when one of her generals, a seasoned veteran named Jarek, stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, his face hardened by years of battle. But today, there was something different in his eyes, a curiosity that hadn't been there before. "Empress," he said, his voice deep and respectful, "you've been a ruler like no other. If you think laughter, trust, and unity will make us stronger, then I will follow you. We will follow you." Carisha's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just his words. It was the way he said them, with a conviction that she had never seen before. It was the first time in her life that she truly felt like her soldiers saw her as a person, not just a ruler. The walls between them were starting to fall. Ethan, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, smiled. Carisha could feel his support, his belief in her, and it gave her the strength to continue. "Then let's begin," Carisha said, a spark of determination in her voice. "Together, we will win, not just with strength, but with laughter, with trust." As the meeting continued, Carisha couldn't help but notice the change in the room. The atmosphere had shifted. The generals were no longer standing at attention in fear. They were discussing plans, sharing ideas, and laughing. Yes, laughing, together. For the first time, Carisha allowed herself to relax, to laugh with them. It wasn't forced, and it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt right. She didn't know what the future held, but in this moment, she realized something. Leadership wasn't just about strength. It was about connection. and she was beginning to understand what it meant to truly lead. Carisha stood on the balcony of her palace, gazing out over the vast empire she had built. The twin moons hung in the sky like silent guardians, casting a soft, ethereal glow over the land below. The lights of the cities flickered like stars on the horizon, a reminder of the power she wielded. But as she looked out, she didn't see just the empire. She saw something else, something that had never been there before: hope. In the weeks since she had begun her journey toward understanding laughter, everything had changed. Her generals, once wary and reserved, now met with her as equals, discussing strategies and challenges with an open mind. They no longer feared her. They respected her in a way that was born not just from her strength, but from her vulnerability, from her willingness to embrace something beyond control. The laughter she had feared for so long had begun to spread through her empire, quietly at first, then with more certainty. It was in the barracks, where soldiers shared jokes after long days of training. It was in the streets, where merchants and travelers exchanged stories that made them smile. It was in the council meetings, where her closest advisors now spoke with more openness, more trust. Carisha had learned that laughter wasn't a weakness. It wasn't something that made her less of a ruler. It was something that made her more. It brought people together, bound them with something more than fear. It created unity in ways she had never thought possible. And now she could see the fruits of that change. Behind her, she could hear the soft sound of footsteps approaching. Ethan, as always, moved with quiet confidence. He had been by her side throughout this entire journey, his patience never wavering, his belief in her never faltering. She turned to face him as he came to stand beside her, his expression calm but warm. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you hadn't listened to me?" Ethan asked, his voice light, but with an edge of curiosity. Carisha smiled, a genuine smile that felt natural now. "I've wondered that many times. I was so sure that power came from control, from fear. But now, I see how much stronger we are when we trust each other, when we share even our most vulnerable moments. You've changed me, Ethan." Ethan looked at her, his expression full of pride. "I didn't change you, Carisha. You changed yourself. You just needed to believe that you could." She nodded, her eyes softening as she gazed out once again at the empire she ruled. There was so much she had learned, so much that had shifted in her heart. But there was still work to be done. Her empire wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But now, she knew that strength didn't just come from crushing enemies, or holding the weight of the galaxy in her hands. It came from understanding, from connection, from laughter. "Have you ever laughed?" Carisha asked, turning to face him again. The question was genuine, but there was a playful gleam in her eyes, something that had never been there before. Ethan blinked in surprise, clearly taken aback by her question. Then, after a brief pause, he laughed, a deep, rich laugh that echoed in the silence of the balcony. Carisha watched him, her smile growing wider. She realized that this moment was different from the others. She didn't just want to know about laughter anymore. She was beginning to understand it, beginning to feel its power in herself. "I have," Ethan said after his laughter faded, still smiling. "But only because I've learned that laughter isn't just about joy. It's about letting go of everything that weighed you down." Carisha nodded, her heart swelling with a new sense of understanding. She had always held everything so tightly, afraid that if she let go, she would lose control. But now, she saw that by letting go, by laughing, by trusting, she had gained so much more than she could have imagined. "We've done it," Carisha said, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "The empire is stronger than ever, not because of fear, but because we've learned to laugh together." Ethan looked at her, his eyes full of admiration. "And that's just the beginning. You've shown everyone, including yourself, what real leadership is. It's not about controlling everything. It's about knowing when to let go, when to trust." Carisha felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. For so long, she had believed that leadership was about strength, about dominance. But now, she understood that true strength came from something deeper, something more meaningful. The laughter had become a part of her empire, but more importantly, it had become a part of her. And with that, she knew that her leadership had transformed. It was no longer about power for power's sake. It was about guiding her people with trust, with laughter, and with the knowledge that, together, they could face anything. As the night deepened and the stars twinkled above them, Carisha and Ithan stood side by side, looking out at the future they would build together. She had once feared that laughter would make her weak, that it would undo everything she had worked for. But now she knew the truth. Laughter had made her stronger. It had made her a better ruler, a better leader, and a better person. The galaxy no longer trembled in fear of her. Now it looked to her with respect, with hope, and with the knowledge that laughter had brought them all closer together. And for the first time in her life, Carisha felt free.